Tracy Longley Cook, Jeremy Long, Danielle Ronte, Stefan Sheenoff, 4 artists who teach in Wright State's art department. This is their work and these are their stories.
When I was a senior in high school, I found photography. Once I started in college at 18, I started taking photography and honestly never looked back. I knew even then, like, it's a piece of paper, it's a two-dimensional object. It has no presence or depth. However, it has so much power to it. The representation that's on that piece of paper has so much power, or whether that's the landscape or the still life or cameraless photography. The work is ultimately about me and things I'm experiencing and the way I relate to the world, the way I think about the audience or the viewer. I'm hoping they can pull something from their own life or their own experience and see that in the work. The theme that I constantly come back to is transformation and change. In a few different bodies of work that I do, I use the landscape as a background for that. There's constantly death and regrowth, and I think that's a really beautiful visual metaphor for the changes we experience in our life. I heavily believe in research and botany or the landscape from a scientific vantage point, and understanding root systems, for example, helps me generate ideas for how I might construct or bring together a photograph. Each step that you take should inform the next, and there's no way that you can anticipate exactly what that direction is. The theme or the intention I have for the work defines the tools and the processes that I ultimately use. Those are all voices within the final product.
I think the biggest benefit that I had was there was this place in Chicago called the Chicago Academy for the Arts. It's a high school for art. My training was just what's referred to as alla prima, direct painting. The subjects or the figures in the painting are things that I'm pretty familiar with. My children and my wife. I have to resort to certain inventions that I'm attracted to in order to figure out the placement of the figures inside the big picture plane. And then the big painting starts. I spend usually anywhere between 3 and 4 months working out the drawing. And when I say drawing, I mean just using 2 pigments so I can locate and understand the things that are happening. And then typically anywhere between 10 to maybe a dozen smaller paintings, ones that help work out some other ideas midway through the painting for people looking at the paintings. The hope is that they'll continue to look and certain things will open up and they'll discover that there's a kind of subplot. I have to do research, I have to look at paintings in a museum continuously and try to figure out how it was made. I never quite do, but I end up figuring out some other things. But the fact that I get to kind of figure it out as I go along makes it worthwhile, or, a reason to get out of bed in the morning.
I've always been interested in art ever since I was a little kid. My dad made stained glass and my mom drew. I had a really engaging high school art teacher. She took us on a study abroad trip to Rome and Paris and England, and I've just been traveling ever since. I base my art on a lot of my travels. My work's overall theme has to do a lot with traveling and finding different, I would say, opportunities within the landscape. For instance, I was working with the stars and constellations, and also some pieces involving glaciers. That comes from my travels to Iceland. I would like people to be able to look at my work and be able to recognize certain patterns that happen in nature. I just like the language of print, the kind of repetitive nature and the different kind of marks that you can get from printmaking. Like, you can get different marks from pencils. I use a lot of carbon paper, and I use cut paper too, so I consider even cutting paper a type of mark making. I like the kind of back and forth conversation that my materials have with the subject matter that I'm approaching. My working method first involves kind of researching a specific site. For instance, like the stars, I need to be able to find exactly where they're at in the sky before I can put it to paper. So in the actual working process, it's very, in my own mind, it needs to be like very meditative and repetitive.
I went to an art high school, and the only way to continue in my country, in Bulgaria, was to go on to the Academy of the Fine Arts. That's when I started working plaster and mold making and casting and so forth, alongside drawing and sculpture. I'm not sure if there was a moment of clean-cut decision, I'm gonna be a sculptor. I sort of found myself making sculpture. I work with different materials, so sometimes it could have to do with modeling and casting, but then sometimes it's making paper pieces and then casting the paper pieces, or sometimes, especially if it's a larger scale, there is steel, there is wood, there is welding and woodwork and construction. I think of something that is projected and it's not necessarily altogether identifiable, a notion rather than a clear image that, in other words, is fairly abstract. But it's an idea, it's a notion. Which comes through form, comes through material. The material informs everything, and then I make decisions according to what I see there. So basically the idea of an object, everything kind of sums up in the word an object, in the context of making it, sort of evolved into an aesthetic to which I still adhere.
To see more of these artists' work, as well as the other artists who teach at Wright State, or to learn more about the Department of Art and Art History, please visit this webpage.